Okay, so if you could get a pencil and tuck it behind your ear during this segment, I'll come back to it in a second. So if you need to pause me while you grab a pencil, please do so. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you got your pencil behind your ear so that you'll be able to respond a little bit later when I ask you a question. Okay, so stick that pencil behind. Okay. Now there are different thresholds at work in our sensory system. One is what we call the absolute threshold. The absolute threshold is defined as the minimum amount of stimulus needed for you to detect it 50% of the time. That's not a huge achievement. You're noticing it half the time, the other half of the time you're not noticing it. So it's the minimum amount of stimulus needed for you to detect it 50% of the time. I grabbed a picture from the internet of a person getting a hearing test because that's what they're testing when they give you a hearing test. You're supposed to hold your hand up whenever you hear a tone, right? And it's always such a challenge when you take a hearing test, right? Because you're like, I think I heard it. Did I hear it? I'm not sure. And you're putting up your hand going, I think I heard it. They want you to be putting up your hand anytime you think you might have heard something, because what they're trying to figure out is that level, that pitch or that loudness that's required for you to be able to detect it half the time. They want you to miss it half the time, get it half the time. And then they figure out what your hearing level is for that pitch and for that intensity. So absolute threshold is a 50-50 proposition. Now, here's a graphic depiction of that I lifted from our textbook that shows the absolute threshold along the bottom axis and the stimulus, the intensity of the stimulus is along the bottom, and then the number of correct detections is on the y-axis. And the absolute threshold is at that level of stimulus, the intensity of stimulus, where you're detecting the stimulus half the time, right? So you get this little box where to the left of that absolute threshold would be information that you're detecting 49.9% of the time or less, right? That is officially called subliminal stimuli. Now you've heard of subliminal messages. You've heard of people maybe being altered in their desire to buy certain products, or maybe learning to quit smoking, or to lose weight using subliminal messages that maybe they listened to while they slept or something like that. Subliminal stimuli would be any stimuli that are presented at a level below that where you would notice it half the time or more. So it's not always hidden. It's not always something that you don't see. So you're just noticing it at less than the chance level. If you've seen the movie Fight Club, you know, there are pictures of Brad Pitt that are inserted one frame at a time earlier on in the movie, so that if you haven't seen the movie, I'm sorry if I'm ruining the movie for you if you haven't seen it, but earlier in the movie, when you haven't met the Brad Pitt character yet, there's one frame at a time pictures inserted of him in the movie, and it's sort of their attempt to, I don't know, subliminally warn you that he's coming or whatever. A lot of people are really jazzed that they can see it. They're like, oh, I saw that he was in there. For it to be subliminal, it only has to be detected 50% of the time or less. So it's not that it has to be so fast that no one can see it, or so quiet that no one can hear it. It just has to be most of the time not detected. Now the question of whether we can shape your buying habits or get you to quit smoking using these messages is a really valid one, because a lot of people think you can shape people's buying habits. In fact, I've had students tell me that they heard that department stores will play subliminal messages that tell you not to shoplift, or that there was a subliminal message in a movie theater that said, buy Coke, you know, eat popcorn, stuff like that. It turns out the buy Coke, eat popcorn one was an urban myth. Apparently it never actually even happened. But the thing is, those kinds of messages, even if they are used, only affect behavior for about 15 seconds. Those kinds of subliminal messages will affect your attitude or your behavior for about 15 seconds. In controlled experiments where they've presented subliminal messages and then gauged people's attitudes about the content of those messages that the people don't even know that they received. Their attitudes are shaped, but very briefly and very transitorily. It's not something that can cause you to become a fan of Coke or buying popcorn, or that could cause you to stop smoking or something like that. So they seem to be very transitory, but kind of intriguing. People wish that they would work. Listening to, your textbook talks about a study where listening to a message to quit smoking is no more effective at quitting smoking than listening to a subliminal message about self-esteem. I mean, presumably it doesn't work at all. It's not doing anything, because it doesn't matter which message you heard. It doesn't affect your behavior in any way. So subliminal messages don't really do anything. Now, your absolute threshold sounds like it should be pretty standard and pretty consistent across time, but it turns out your absolute threshold is affected by a few things. One is competition in the same modality. So whereas while you're taking a hearing test with your headphones on and you're completely focused, you can hear some really quiet sounds or some very maybe high-pitched sounds that you wouldn't hear in the regular environment. Once you get out into the regular environment and there are other sounds competing, suddenly your absolute threshold goes up. You're going to need a more intense sound for you to detect it. So if you have competition in what we call the same modality, hearing is one modality, vision is a different modality, touch is a different modality. So if it's in the same modality, so if you've got lots of ambient noise going on, you're going to take a louder sound for you to detect it. If you have a lot of light in the room, it's going to take a brighter light for you to detect it as new and different. So competition in the same modality will raise your absolute threshold. Distraction. I mean, here we are getting our hearing test. She's completely focused and waiting for a sound, right? If you're distracted, it's going to take a more intense stimulus for you to detect it. So, you know, it's oh so convenient when we're the one calling someone. I'm a mom, so I call people. Dinner's ready. And if you've got people who are distracted, they're playing a video game, they're watching a movie, they're talking on the phone, they're texting someone. If they're distracted, they may literally not detect my voice saying dinner's ready, right? It's not that they're ignoring me and trying to be mean. They're distracted. They're already paying attention to something else. One of the rules in my household is don't talk to me while I have my laptop in my lap and my fingers are moving, because I'm often teaching my online classes right in the middle of the room, you know, like in the house while everybody else is watching TV, I'm working, right? And normally, you know, if I'm going through and looking at, you know, your project submissions and I'm reading, I can be distracted and catch back where I was, and that's fine. I don't mind if you talk to me then. But if I'm composing a message to a student and I'm, you know, thinking about what I'm trying to say, my fingers are moving on the keyboard, don't talk to me, because I'm not going to hear you. My brain has taken my attention. I'm not listening, right? And it's nothing personal. I'm just not listening. I'm distracted. So it'll take a louder noise. You know, the fire alarm would have to go off, right, for me to notice it. Expectation. If you're expecting a sound to come or a vision to come or a smell to come, you're going to detect it at a much lower level of intensity than if you're not expecting it. So an unexpected smell. The other day we were having a barbecue in the backyard. I guess the correct term is grilling, but whatever. We were preparing meat on on a barbecue grill with briquettes. And while the barbecue was being lit, I was upstairs taking a shower. So when I came downstairs, I said, I smell smoke. And my husband said, well, we just started the barbecue. And I said, it doesn't smell like barbecue smoke. It smells like something burning, like not briquettes. And my husband said, oh no, you're just smelling, you know, we just lit it, so that's what you're smelling. So, okay. A few minutes later, he's like, I smell it too. You're right. It should have been gone by now. So he finally went out to look, and lo and behold, our fire starters, which I had, any Girl Scouts in the audience know what I'm talking about when I say I made Girl Scout fire starters with cardboard egg cartons that I put like dryer fluff and sawdust into, and then filled with melted candle wax. Our fire starters had somehow started on fire in our storage closet, and they were just as my husband went out there to check on it, he saw the flash over, and they literally burst into flame just as he went there. They'd been smoldering when I came downstairs. His expectation that he already knew that stuff was burning and that the briquettes were burning and things like that caused him to need a higher threshold for stimulation, for him to notice that that was wood smoke I was smelling, or in that case it was cardboard smoke I was smelling. For me, I came in clean. I didn't know, I didn't have that expectation, and so when I came downstairs, I was like, something's burning, right? I needed a lower level of stimulation for me to detect it. Unfortunately, I went with his interpretation, which we'll talk about later when we get to social psychology, because one of the things that happens is we conform to the group. We don't trust our own interpretations well enough. I should have gone with my interpretation, but I figured he knew what he was talking about, right? And that's a trap we get into in social situations. Alertness. If you are awake and alert, you're going to detect things more readily than if you're sleepy, fatigued, stuff like that. That's why it's so risky to drive drowsy, because when you're driving drowsy, you may not notice things that you would if you were fully awake and alert while you're driving. You may not actually see things that are coming in through your eyes. You may not notice it. You'll have a higher threshold for information, and so you may not hear the sirens that are approaching from behind. You may not see the dog that darted in front of you, something like that, when you're drowsier, because you're not alert enough to detect that. All right. Let's go ahead and take a break here, because I think I talked a little long, and we'll come back and talk about difference thresholds in the next segment. Keep that pencil behind your ear.